Go.
That's a good one. Wait for tomorrow.
Yeah, so you'll see a different food selection today. I mean, snack selection. These are Holly's preferred crackers, oyster crackers. So it's a different version of Saratoga Whiskey Club tonight. But we have Lindsay in town. We've been planning this for 2 months. She is, I already forgot some of the amazing things you are for Barrell, but the Northeast Regional Director of all of Barrell and Stellum. So she's the boss of the Northeast. And some of you will remember the Stellum Barrel as well that we did, which was our great introduction to them. So this is all Barrell. We have some really awesome whiskeys to taste tonight. And I guess I'm your leader tonight. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, Holly.
Thanks.
Thank you guys all for coming to the whiskey night tonight. And while I'm hosting with Barrell and Stellum, I'll feel free to ask any questions during the whole process. I'll repeat them so that our guests online can hear them as well too. But the first dram that you had today was Barrell Craft Spirits, our gray label whiskey that we came out with last year. It was released in 2021. It was a 24-year-old Canadian whiskey blend that was finished in Armagnac and Oloroso casks. It's one of my favorite pours favorite blends that we've ever done for Barrell. We didn't do another gray label whiskey this year just because we didn't have the whiskeys. We used some of those older whiskeys and as components in other blends, but I think this is a really special whiskey. It's 121.46 proof, so it is not shy, but it does have like a really nice milk chocolate note to it. But there's whatever's on the shelves is like whatever's available now at this point. So it is like one of those whiskeys to hunt for sure.
We have one
I'd
bottle
recommend.
left because one went to the tasting. So
But it definitely is a little treat to try something like this because we won't do it again. But every year, like you'll see on your tasting map, we'll release a gray label line and a gold label line of our higher end, smaller batch blends. So today you're going to be tasting the gray label bourbon that was released this year and gray label seagrass that was released this year. So those are kind of in the same price point of that gray label whiskey that you just had. But we're not going to start with those, obviously. We'll get our way up to that. So a little bit about Barrell too. We're going to start with actually the New Year bourbon, I think would be a nice place to start. So it's probably the top left-hand side, I think. So while I'm talking about Barrell, if you want to just take a few sips of that, we are an independent bottler and blender for those not familiar with the company, which means that we don't do any distillation. What we do is we source barrels from all over the world and use them as blending ingredients. So we work with about 72 or so different suppliers, work with brokers, we work with distilleries, we buy barrels and use them to create component blends, which we then create bigger batch blends of things. We started the company with Barrell Bourbon, this line right here, batch number 1. And we're currently at batch 34, which just got released into the market, I think this week. We create about 3 different batches a year. They all yield around like, I would say 3,000 to 4,000 cases, about 100 barrels if you want to think about it in terms of volume, in terms of barrels, but they're all different component blends, all blended for different flavor profiles. The New Year bourbon is essentially a bourbon batch that we release at the end of the year in celebration of our relationships with different distilleries and different places that we source barrels from. The normal blends of Barrell are usually Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee, where we normally get our juice from. But our New Year bourbon has bourbon from Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee, but also some other states like New York, Ohio, Texas, Wyoming. This particular year, we incorporated Maryland for the first time. And it always seems to me to be a little bit more friendly, fruit forward, a little bit lighter and fresher in style, but still like a blend of 5 to 10-year-old bourbons are going into these blends, but smaller. It's a little bit smaller than a traditional bourbon batch, but it comes out at the end of the year every year to kind of like celebrate the year.
Was last year the first year that you did that?
No, I think it's like the 5th or 6th year that we've done
Maybe
that.
That was the first time, but that was fantastic.
They're-
Last year's.
They're always my favorite. They're always one of my favorite ones because honestly, I like to bring them to my family's house because some of them don't drink whiskey. And I think this is like a nice entry into cask strength whiskey. It's got a little bit more fruit on the palate. There's more of like a cherry note to it. It's not as savory as not as wood forward as some whiskeys. And I think it's really great that we're incorporating some smaller distilleries, even though we can't say who or what they are, but
Oh,
you're,
they're
and
asking,
everyone online.
what was the blend for this? Can you go into more specifics of the distilleries or
I cannot.
or at least can you list the states again? I think
Yes,
they
I
want?
definitely can.
We're gonna pull.
Yeah. No, I've learned my lesson, shot myself in the foot too many times. But no, this is I have been media trained. So no, this is a blend of like 5 to 10-year-old bourbons from Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, but also Ohio, New York, Texas, Wyoming, and we incorporated Maryland for the first time this year. So it makes it different than last year. Is that what it says on there?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was
Nice.
Ian and Maryland.
Yeah.
So you did it right.
I don't know if it was exactly the order that it was in there, but could have
What's
been.
the ABV?
The ABV on this, I think it is 113.54. So it's probably one of the lower ABVs that you are going to be trying this evening, which is why I wanted to start with that. We'll probably do the gray label bourbon next, and then I'll do the Vantage. I think that would make the most sense. The gray label bourbon this year is going to be like lower proof than the New Year bourbon, but it's definitely more savory and oxidative. So I didn't want to start with that one. But yes, I think the next one we'll taste is going to be Barrell Gray Label Bourbon.
Hey, Lindsay, I'm
So
sorry.
every year we come out with the 3 bourbon batches, the New Year bourbon, and then we come out with a vertical series of bourbon where we come out with a gray label bourbon and a gold label bourbon. The gray label bourbons, the gold label bourbon is obviously we make the least of that. We put the oldest stuff in there. The gold label also sits for about 1.5 years in toasted American oak. It's totally different in the palate. Gray label bourbon, it's blended to be different styles every year, but it is also incorporating older bourbons. So this is a majority of this is going to be 15-year-old bourbon from Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee. But we do incorporate a little bit of younger bourbon in this that we're resting in old gray label bourbon barrels from 3 years ago for 3 years. So this is the 5th release of gray label bourbon. We started this project where we were like, we're going to keep some bourbon, like blended bourbon in the old gray label barrels about 3 years ago, we decided. And then they started tasting them this year and wanted to incorporate them in this year's gray label bourbon blend. So though it's not age dated, the majority of this is going to be older 15-year-old bourbons from Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee, but it's completely different in style than last year's. Last year's had a 15-year age statement. It was blended to be like what you think 15-year-old bourbon's going to taste like, which is like oaky, like chewy, tannic. This one I feel like is a little bit more gentle and oxidative, which I kind of prefer this one over the last one, especially because I think you're pulling flavors from the old gray label bourbon barrel. So it's got different types of notes rather than just sitting in new charred American oak for 15 years. I don't know. What do you guys think of this one?
It's kind of yeasty and fruity on the nose.
Yeah, which I normally don't get from older, like 15-year-old.
So we jumped to Barrell Gray Label Bourbon. So
Gray
the
Label
online
Bourbon.
is very confused.
It's
At
the
the
middle
moment.
of the bottom.
I know, but they're not sitting in front of a tasting mat. So,
Barrel Gray
um,
Label.
Do we know what number it was?
Why don't you just
Dave, you have a
repeat
kit,
which
would you?
one we're on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What number?
Is it gray
So we-
label bourbon that's Dram 5? Is that what we're supposed to be drinking?
Upper right.
Can you say Dram
Yes.
3?
Dram
Yeah.
5.
What?
We're drinking.
Oh,
That's so they have
That's a
numbers
secret.
that unfortunately don't correlate.
5 is the
Ah,
secret, right?
Okay, so we went to.
Okay.
Tell me what to drink, Holly.
Let me see.
I think I think I mapped them out properly, but this is gram 1.
That was the one.
That's the, yeah, and that's the Vantage, right? New Year, sorry.
Dram 5 is the gray label bourbon. That
And
one
that's
is
what we're
not
supposed to be
Are we
drinking.
drinking number 5 now?
All right, so we have
Slow
we
down.
have confirmed that it is Dram 5 we are on right now.
Okay, thank you.
All right,
Yeah.
so
And do you mind, could you explain
This-
gold
this one.
gray versus core?
Again, yes.
Core range again? Yeah.
Yes. We started the company with Barrell Bourbon batch number 1. Instead of tasting a batch 33, we tasted the New Year bourbon first, which is like essentially a batch of bourbon that we release at the end of every year. About 100 barrels are kind of blended into it in terms of quantity. But then we have a vertical series. We do gray label and then gold label bourbon every year. So the gray label, each blend and each year is going to be a different blend, but they're going to be in the same kind of vertical series every year. The gray label, we make way less than a batch size. The gold label, way less than the gray label in terms. And it varies how much we're making depending on how many barrels we want to include. We're blending it for flavor every year too. So this gray label bourbon, this is our 5th time making gray label bourbon. And then it's our 2nd time making gold label bourbon this year. But every year you'll have a different gray and gold label release that will hit the shelves. MSRP on these bottles are around $250 and for the gray label, and then $500 for the gold label series. And
What's the price point of the first one that you get?
I would say our MSRP, we say $84.99 usually, but anywhere from like $80 to $90,
Not
I usually
Canadian.
say. Oh no,
Not the Canadian.
the Canadian one was $250. So it's a gray label. It's a gray label whiskey.
I'll pull up the prices too that we have.
But the one that the reason why I'm tasting the gray label bourbon after the New Year bourbon, and we're skipping that way, because I want to taste bourbon first. And the next one is going to be Vantage, which is a bourbon, but it's finished in 3 different virgin oak barrels. So I definitely wanted to do that after we taste like pure blended bourbon. So this one is going to be the last pure blended bourbon in the flight that you're tasting today. And it's not too high in proof. I think it's 100.58 proof. So it's pretty mellow. I think it still has a lot of flavor for being mellow.
So we're gonna do all the bourbons now and then move into the ryes.
Yes. So the next one is going to be
Well,
Dram
Lindsay,
4.
Lindsay,
Dram 4.
this is pretty good. Usually we get this confused after 6 or 7 whiskeys, not at the start.
That's okay. Barrel's
Can we slow the
confusing,
tasting down? Can we slow?
we should have listed it
Yeah, we're
differently on the
we'll
mat.
slow down so that you can drink.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
So we could take a break here and talk about the company for a little while too, if that makes
And any
sense too.
comments on the whiskeys too, because there's a lot of maturations and old and.
Yes.
yeah, we'll take
So-
a minute, and I'll give pricing too.
So after we started establishing just doing regular blended bourbon, we started coming up with a core lineup of finished whiskeys. So that's where you get Dovetail, which kind of launched in 2018. That was a blend of Tennessee bourbon and Indiana light whiskey that they put into Dunn Vineyards Napa Cabernet barrels, Blackstrap molasses rum casks, and late bottle vintage port pipes. But it kind of came after they were doing barrel whiskey, which they kind of just were messing around with different barrel finishes, and they realized that the wine finishes were great. Our chief innovation officer, Will Schragus, he was at Dunn and just joking around being like, oh, like, I'll give you a whiskey for some barrels and whatnot, to the guy that works at Dunn or owns Dunn. And he was like, yeah, that sounds great. Let's do it. So they actually, if you go to visit Dunn Vineyards in Napa, you'll see some barrel Dovetail there as well. So we get the barrels directly from Dunn, which is kind of cool. They're all French oak barrels. Dovetail came first. Then you had Armida come after Dovetail in the core lineup. That came in October of 2019. So that was a fall release that they thought was just going to be kind of like a one-off, but now we're blending it once a year because it has been a staple in the portfolio, but that's a finished bourbon. So it's Tennessee and Indiana bourbon that's finished in Jamaican rum, pear brandy, and Sicilian Amaro barrels. So kind of like pithy and citrus forward. And then Seagrass kind of finished that lineup, we thought, until Vantage came out, which is going to be what you taste next. But Seagrass came out. That was a rye that we're blending from Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Canada. That's finished in agricole rum, apricot brandy, and Madeira, which we'll get to taste later. And then the one that we're on right now that we're going to taste is going to be Barrell Vantage, which is the new addition to the core lineup. So our perfect shelf set on the shelf would be a batch of bourbon, Armida, Seagrass, Dovetail, and Vantage. Those are what we would like to see and what we would like everyone to taste, essentially. So if you go to dram number 5 on your placemat, that's gonna,
We're gonna take a 5-minute break.
Okay.
So that people can taste and talk, and then the online crew can catch their breath as well. Yeah, we'll take
Perfect.
5 minutes.
got it.
Vinny, we're on our third one.
Vinny, Frank can help us with what we tasted. So can Dan.
All right. And then we've done this one and.
All right, so the Canadian barrel that we first tasted, the Welcome Whiskey. The 24-year Canadian is $219.99. Have a bottle of that. Then we went to Barrell New Year. That is $79.99. And then Barrell Gray Label is $249.99. And that's all we have. Okay.
Can you read the description?
No, I can't.
This bourbon.
Distilled in Tennessee, Kentucky, and Indiana, USA.
At the same time.
At the same time. Barrell Craft Spirits Gray Label Bourbon is a blend of bourbons of varying ages and 5 different mash bills matured in barrels crafted from 36 months, air-dried wood to concentrate flavor and highlight their rich characteristics. It's bottled at cask strength, so you can experience its true flavor. This was all spoken by Joe Beatrice.
Joe Beatrice is a founder of Barrell. So it's, while we're taking a break, I can talk about Joe. So Joe started the company back in 2013. We launched our first batch. I think the first batch of bourbon hit the market in 2014. So he started the company and he was just really inspired by Scotland and what they do with Scotch there and how they blend it. And he tasted it directly from the cask. So he was like, I want to do that here. He was originally going to maybe blend for a while, start his own distillery because he was really into whiskey. Then he realized there was so much opportunity with blending and so many good quality barrels that you can get and kind of create and buy these unloved barrels and create them into like better than what they were before. So he's continued to do blending. Trip Stimson joined the operation. Eventually, he used to work for Brown Forman as a whiskey scientist. He studied specifically yeast strains. So we say that he drives the flavor bus, honestly. So we have Trip and Joe. We're blending. That's like kind of at the time when like Dovetail was coming out. We were doing all those weird finished barrels. And then Nick Christensen is on the blending team as well. She used to work in the on-premise world. She's a younger woman. She worked at the Butcher and Block. She has like a Psalms palette. So she is also on the blending team. So you have 3 different identities and 3 different backgrounds on the blending team, kind of bouncing ideas off of each other. So that's kind of why. And then also Will Schragus, who worked for a long time was a Psalm too, worked in rum for a while and is now on the team. And those 4 people essentially are the ones that are like bouncing the ideas off of each other and tasting through all these blends to create the company at this point. And we just bought a rick house. So we bought the old Angel Envy rick house. So we are filling it up. We had bought it from Angel's Envy. It's like the old Yellowstone rick house, but we got to go in it. I was in Kentucky in January and it was so eerie to go into an empty rick house. I don't think I would have ever had that experience before. They're always full barrels.
Does it smell good?
It smelled like whiskey and like wood, and it was cold in there. And they're like, oh, don't come in the summertime because it's like 1,000,000 degrees up here. It was scary though, because we walked all the way up and like it's like all wooden. And I like got nervous, had to go down because it was high. So that's a great.
Could you repeat
Yeah.
the question too?
So we asked if we buy barrels fully matured or if we age them ourselves. But we do a little bit of both at this point. We buy barrels as they are, and we're like, okay, they need to wait. We don't want to blend them yet. And we'll put them in a temperature controlled warehouse at that point. Or we take them out, we buy fully matured barrels and we're like, we want to take these out and keep them as they are. And we keep them in totes, which are an anaerobic environment, so they don't have oxygen. So we would take them out of the barrel and put them in stainless steel containers so that where they're not exposed and they're not changing their properties. So the reason why you want to keep something in barrel is because you want that oxygen to be letting in a slow way and for it to develop more. But sometimes we're buying things and tasting them and we're like, no, this is where we want it. This is how we want the ingredient to be, and we'll put it in a tote, in a stainless steel tote. But now we have the opportunity to buy things that are younger and put them in the rick house and age them. It's just going to help us to create blends for the future too. And we have so many barrels. We went into the guests all the time, buyers all the time ask me, can we go down to Kentucky and visit? And we're like, no, it's a danger zone. If we have any more people in that facility, there's like forklifts going around. There's like not enough space. So we are opening a new facility. We're expanding that. It's being built out now. So hopefully that'll be ready in the fall as well, just because we're outgrowing ourselves in terms of barrels. Still in Louisville, still in the industrial area, not downtown, but like maybe 20 minutes away from the current facility in Gilmer. Can you what?
Every time we've gone to Kentucky, we scoot around town.
Nice, the scooters.
Yeah, we're those people.
Oh no, that's great, honestly. I mean, I went on a scooter once in DC and I fell and I was like, oh, that's the last time I'm doing that.
So
Yeah.
no up and rig houses and no scooters.
No, I like the ground.
Oh, yeah.
The ground is good for me. No, definitely the scooter, because DC is weird because it was like a hill area and I was like, okay, I'm done with this. This is not for me. It was fun though for a second.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really fun.
Can you, while we're catching our breath, still explain the difference between stellum and barrel?
Yes.
And can you repeat that question too?
So the difference between stellum and barrel. So barrel existed since 2013. It's like kind of the parent company of barrel, of stellum. Same blending team with stellum, but different identities really. So stellum is a blend of Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee bourbons or ryes. But most of the blends are like being sourced from MGP or from Indiana. But we are just exclusively blends of straight bourbon, blends of straight ryes, single barrel bourbon, single barrel rye. We're not doing anything weird and esoteric with finishing casks. So it's like a little bit more of a, I don't want to say a simpler brand because we're doing such involved micro blending there as well. But you have stellum bourbon, you have stellum rye, which are blended for consistency. They're always going to be the same proofs, always going to be the same flavor profiles. And then you have our single barrels, which you picked, which are Indiana bourbon and then Indiana rye, which are around 5 years old at this point. And then we have stellum specialty blends. So we'll have the black label stellum or the stellum Hunter's Moon and Lone Cypress, which are the current releases. We did an Equinox and Fibonacci last year that came out. And those are micro blends of essentially built on the stellum bourbon and the stellum rye, but layered in with smaller portions of barrels and micro ingredients. So maybe we have this one barrel that's fantastic, but we don't want to bottle it as a single barrel. We want to use like a bucket in a blend because it changes the flavor of that blend. So those stellum black labels are going to be like essentially really micro blends, and they're a quarter of the size of a barrel bourbon batch.
Sorry about that. It was, there we go. Perfect. Dan. Oh. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
But of course, the stellum black label or the stellum specialty blends are about the quarter of the size of a regular barrel bourbon batch. So very small batch blends. We usually like maybe make 600 or so, 600 to 900 cases of that like nationally. So they're very tiny micro blends based on the stellum regular, but then layered in with some older barrels, some choice barrels, but not even whole barrels, sometimes buckets of barrels. We're blending ingredients and then we're blending those ingredients. So it's like many multi-layer process of blending at that point. But that's stellum, a little bit simpler. Barrel has way more going on to it, which is like essentially why we're tasting all the barrel stuff right now. Stellum would be a fun flight, but barrel is even more fun because we have different finishes that we're doing on different casks. There's the gold label and the gray labels that we're doing too. So there's a little bit more involved with barrel, and it's been around a little bit longer too. Thanks. That was a good question.
All right. Are we feel good about moving on to
Number 4.
a number? Yeah.
Number 4, it's going to be Barrell Vantage. So now we're getting into your finishing, but Barrell Vantage is still considered a blend of straight bourbons because it is a blend of Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee bourbon that are going in to 3 different virgin barrels. So new barrels. So the first part of the blend is going to be going into new toasted American oak. A portion of the blend is going into virgin French oak, and then a portion is going into virgin Mizunara, which is a Japanese oak. And then it sits in those barrels from anywhere from 2 to 12 months, and then it's blended back together again after that. I say 2 to 12 months because they're really tasting after about 8 weeks and then pulling it when it's ready. And sometimes it's not ready, and then sometimes it is ready. So it really varies depending on it. With our Barrell Vantage, Dovetail, Seagrass, Armida, they are all blended for consistency of flavor profile, which means that sometimes it's maybe not the same exact recipe that's going in every time, but they're the same concept. So if you look at like the bottle of Vantage, we could pass this around, but if you look really closely, you'll see a little tiny 1 in the corner of the label, like right where the colors change. This is the first release of Vantage. The proofs might vary because if you want to pass it around just to look at it. Oh yeah, right here. It's on right there. So the proofs may vary, but we're blending for consistency. So it might be a different proof the second batch, but the flavor consistency is going to be maintained because we're not non-age statement whiskeys, but they're 5 to 16 years old. So we don't want to like put a 5 on the label because it has a bunch of older stuff in it too. But we do that with our batches, but the batches also have like 5 to 10, 5 to 16 years. Whiskey. Nothing that we do for Barrell is less than 5 years old though.
Will it always be in those 3 barrel types?
Yes. The question was, will it always be in the American oak, French oak, and Mizunara? And Vantage will always be in those 3 barrel types.
Someone asked, is it still the same? Is it still the same components for Vantage, just varying ratios sometimes?
It's still, so every time we're blending Vantage, it's still going to be Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee
Okay.
bourbon from 5 to 16 years old and put into those various barrels, but they're blended. So you'll have the same ingredients, but it might be different ratios every time because they're blending for a consistency of flavor. So it's not going to be exactly the same recipe every time because you're working with things that are not constant, right? Because it's a barrel and there's oxygen getting into the barrel and things change. Like, I mean, you guys have probably all sampled single barrels and realized you can have a barrel from the same portion of the rick house, same distillery, same mash bill, and it could be wildly different in flavor profile. And we're not doing any distillation, so we're getting these barrels. So we're using them and being like, okay, so this is the same basic. So we built it with the same bones. So it's like almost the same stuff, but it tastes different. Maybe it needs a little bit more wood forward barrels, or maybe we need to let that whiskey sit in the American oak a little bit longer this time. And so they're really blending for flavor profile and so it's not going to be the same recipe every single time. It's hard to get that
Do
one.
the whiskeys from the different states all go into each of the 3 types of wood, or
Yes, so the question was,
does it change each year or every batch, or what happens?
yeah, so the question is, do Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee whiskeys, are they blended and going into each of the barrels, or is Tennessee whiskey going into the American oak? Is that the question?
Yes.
Yes, it is. Thank
No,
you.
we're blending. So it's definitely blends so it's not just like, we're not taking Tennessee and Indiana bourbon and putting it into the American oak. And then the Tennessee bourbon is going into the Japanese oak. It's a blend of all those 3 different states. We'll have micro blends. So there'll be a blend of maybe 6 to 8 year olds, Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee bourbon that we have ready as an ingredient that we're like, okay, this stuff is going to go into this barrel. Or like, we'll have a blend of like 10 to 15-year-old bourbons from Tennessee and Indiana. And then we'll be like, all right, that's going to be blended with this and go into this barrel. So it definitely changes. Not one state goes into one barrel.
Okay, so it's already blended and then that blend is put into finishing casks.
Yeah, we have multiple different blends. So it's basically blends of blends. I would say we blend ingredients and then we'll have that ingredient. So maybe an ingredient would be like 6 to 8 year old light fruit forward bourbons that are blended from Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee. Then we'll have an ingredient that's like Indiana and Kentucky and Tennessee bourbon that's older, wood forward, tannic. And we'll use those as ingredients to balance flavor. And so it's not just we're taking barrels and blending them together. We're taking them and blending them together to create ingredients that we're then blending together or finishing and then blending together. So it's a very multi-step process at this point.
Never make the same thing twice.
Yes, but you can't. And like, even if you taste like the versions of like Dovetail, sometimes people will be like, that one tastes a little different than the last one. And I'm not going to tell people that they're wrong, because they are different than the last one, but it is blended for consistency. So it's the same type of energy and the same type of intention that's going into each of these blends. It kind of is what makes Barrell fun, but it also makes it really hard to understand sometimes. But it makes everything that you buy from Barrell different and exciting. And I think that is what we're looking for now as consumers.
Why the name Barrell? I have a 3-part question.
Okay.
Overrode. All right, Shalom first, then we'll go to Nate.
It's a 3-part question. So since it's all straight bourbon, it's still technically a bourbon, correct? Unlike in Scotland, where you'd have to call it a blended malt, this is still technically a bourbon.
Well,
It's just straight bourbon.
well, so it is a blend of straight bourbons. So it is still referred to as a blend.
I didn't know if you could call it a bourbon, since
It is a bourbon. So as long as it is from Indiana, as long as it is 50% or more corn.
initially
fr-
matured and new charred oak.
Yeah.
So since it's only comprised of bourbons, it is still a bourbon.
Yes. And also because it has been done in new oak. Yeah, new oak.
Okay, and the next question is for Holly. The 2 parts for Holly are, what's the ABV and what's the price of the version that you have in the shop?
Vantage is $85.99 and it is
ABV.
57.22%.
What was the percent?
It's 114.44. Blend one. And then I had a question, why Barrell with the 2 L's? So I would love to say that it is because we're using so many different barrels and blending a bunch of barrels, but it was for internet hits of a misspell of a barrel, but it is very clever. And also, yeah.
It is really genius.
And I definitely misspell barrel all the time now, and because of the name, I'm like, oh, single barrel with 2 L's, like, I'm like, oops. But I also think that we kind of have grown into the name really well, because we do our experiments with like Dovetail, Seagrass, Armida, Vantage, like with different casks and different barrels. And we do private release whiskeys, which have different barrels. We're blending barrels that kind of fit into the name. But Joe Beatrice was he was there for the boom of the internet and worked with a lot of advertising companies and marketing agencies. So kind of worked. The algorithm. Do you know how many times I get that? So many times. So many times. Barrell is all Barrell. I'm like, oh no, but I see it. It's a higher price point whiskey, like sophisticated. So people want to put some emphasis on it. I get it, but it's also. So what do you guys think of Vantage? Vantage is one of our new products that we launched in September, and this year it got number 3 in Whiskey Advocate. So it's on the cover of Whiskey Advocate this year. It's number 3 whiskey of the year. We're hoping, so with Dovetail, Seagrass, and Armida, they're all different finishes. Our bourbon batches change every batch. Every batch is different, blended for different things. So we wanted to do something for Barrell that kind of showcased 3 different finishing casks, but also was bourbon and also was blended for consistency. So Vantage is kind of that thing for us. And I think that it's a great gift for someone that maybe is less adventurous to try maybe Seagrass or Dovetail, but wants still a bourbon and likes that like creamy textured style of bourbon. It's like right at that price point.
Charles asks, was that the thought of being a premium spirit from the get-go when Barrell started to be a premium product?
You know, I don't entirely know that, sir. I think that it's priced as appropriately as we can price it because of all of the other costs and buying the barrels. But we wanted to do Joe wanted to do something that was cash strength, hands down. So when you do something cash strength, there's a certain price point that comes with that as well. And he's not just doing any distillation, he's buying the barrel. So there's a certain price that comes with that too. And all of that, like the blending expertise. So I think we always wanted to do that. We launched Stellum in a way to kind of bring the price down as much as we possibly could. And honestly, Stellum is basically a batch of bourbon, like Stellum Bourbon, Stellum Rye. They're basically batches. The thing that makes Stellum more affordable is the fact that we're blending for consistency and we don't have to pay for new labels every time. And the bottle shape is a little bit easier. And so Stellum's still the quality of barrel. And with Stellum, we're using 4 to 16-year-old bourbons and 4 to 10-year-old ryes in the blend. So maybe there's a little bit more younger stuff in Stellum, but it's just as good and as high quality as barrel, but you're cutting the cost with the bottle shape, with the labels being similar every single time too. Barrel's bottle is patented for Barrell. There's no other company that can use our bottle. So we invested in certain things to make it a little bit more of a premium spirit too. But honestly, when you taste it on the palate, coming from like the wine industry and being a somm, this stuff is flavorful, delicious. I didn't even like whiskey, and now my palate has shifted to whiskey. So I think so, but I am not 100% certain. But I think that is, we have patented, or yeah, we
Yeah.
trademarked the bottle shape.
Yeah, I mean, think Scotch, now there's a lot of Scotch brands that have, yeah, custom bottles.
Diageo has a trademark on the same bottle for a lot of the
Yeah, I was told that. I am not a lawyer and I do not know for sure, but I was told that.
You can take the pillow off.
So those were all bourbons.
Before any of us can move on.
There's matches, you said. Yeah, so we went through the first, essentially the first 3 that were bourbon, and then we did the mystery pour. So if you want to start where we are now, we're going to start with rye, and then you can go back to the other ones too. I think the next one, do we take a break or are we good on?
I'm scrolling up in the chat. Oh, John Sconzo has asked, where were you working as a somm?
Oh, I worked at, so the last place that I worked was during COVID. I worked at Lalu, which was a little wine bar restaurant in Prospect Heights. Worked there during the pandemic. They closed down Vanderbilt Avenue in Prospect Heights. So we were able to bring tables outside in the street and like serve. So I worked there as like a server, a manager, a host, and whatever before that. But before that, I worked at Nick's, which was a vegan and vegetarian Michelin star restaurant that was at Bio Union Square. And I was a wine director there. And then I was the somm and beverage manager at the William Vale Hotel before that. So like Luca, Westlight. I worked for NoHo Hospitality at their restaurant Little Park as a somm, and I worked at Locanda Verde as a server. So I like worked for that company for a while before that. I bought whiskey. I bartended at Mylino for a little while too. That was another thing, but I bought the whiskey for the restaurants and bars. And then like with COVID, I just didn't know what the future of restaurants were going to be like. And it kind of was an opportunity that was presented to me. And I was like, are you sure? Like my friend is Will. He was in my tasting group back in the day, Will Schragus, when I was first studying for somm exam. I remember him like blinding me on like Sangiovese versus Nebbiolo versus like Cabernet at like this like little cafe. And I'm like, right before I took the exam, and I'm like, oh, so we had a long-term friendship relationship. And so when this happened and COVID happened, he's like, we need to hire someone for New York and New Jersey. Are you interested in like interviewing for this? And I said, I don't know, like I don't drink like whiskey. Like I buy it, I know about it, I've studied it before, but like I don't know if I have the palate for it. And he's like, no, you'll be fine, you'll learn it, you'll grow the palate. And like your tongue is a muscle, right? So you taste, and like the way that I learned wine, I didn't know anything. He's like, you didn't know anything before about wine and you learned it. And so I think it was kind of fun too at that time in my life where I got to shift into learning about whiskey and learning about spirits, and especially about like cask strength whiskey and blending. It's like something that's like we've done it for a long time. Barrell has, but I think like other people are starting to do it and starting to do the finishing, and it's just like a really interesting place to be right now in the industry. And I like spirits people so much. They're just really fun. And
Are we better than?
yeah, I'm
we
not gonna
don't spit.
say.
We don't spit.
Yeah.
on our- We don't spit out our wine. We don't
Yeah.
spit out our.
I'm
our
not gonna
whiskey.
say that they're one is better than the other, but I'm having a way better time like with the whiskey than wine.
And Will is the VP
Wait,
sales, or I know he's a big wine guy.
Will is the chief innovation officer. So he's like the brain behind a lot of these ideas to blend and stuff. So he was one that connected Dunn for the Dovetail. But he was like number 2 or 3 employee for Barrell back in the day. He was working at Zacky's as the spirits buyer there when Joe Beatrice sold him batch 1 of Barrell.
That's in
And
Terrytown, like a big wine
Yep.
auction house. Yeah.
And so he bought Barrell batch 1 and like met Joe at that point. And then that's the future of Barrell. I think Will met Joe at Barrell and they were only doing batch bourbon at the time. And he kind of helped like create the ideas to do all these like weird, fun, cool blending things. But Will's been like a good person to know in the industry for me and just like a good friend and good person all around. But he was like, you should interview. It was a really long process of interviewing to interview with so many people. I had to do a presentation, sweating down my back. I was like, oh my God, and Zoom, like, oh, I just remember that. And he's like, you did great. I'm like, really? Because I don't remember. I blacked out. Like, you know that feeling? I'm like, I don't know what I said, but it seemed to have been good because now I'm here and I've learned a lot about whiskey. So the next one that we're gonna start now with the rye. So we're going from bourbon to rye. So it's gonna be number 2, I think.
On our
Yeah.
tasting mats, yeah, I know.
Number 2, Barrell Seagrass. So Seagrass, this is 120.2 proof. So just as hot as the first one that you tasted. But Seagrass is going to be a blend of rye whiskeys from Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Canada. So I have a little Canadian rye, a little American rye that are blended together. This one actually specifically, we're putting the Canadian rye in the apricot brandy casks. I know a question earlier was, do we blend like all the different states and put them in the blends? But the Canadian rye really takes well to the apricot brandy barrel, the cask. So it pulls a lot more flavor from that. Canadian rye tends to be a little bit higher proof wise too. So the apricot brandy helps temper that proof. And then you have Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee rye that are finished in rum agricole and Malmsey Madeira barrels. So you have apricot brandy, Malmsey Madeira, and rum agricole casks. Rum agricole is specifically from the island of Martinique, and it's made from pure sugarcane juice instead of molasses or demerara. So it tends to be a little bit funkier and like saltier. And then Madeira is your fortified wine from the island of Madeira, which is like actually closer to Africa than it is to Portugal. It's owned by Portugal, but it is, there's 4 different grape varieties that you can make from Madeira, and Malmsey is going to be your sweetest one. So it's definitely your richest and sweetest, more oxidative note to it. Seagrass is probably my favorite one that we are tasting today.
You've
I know
been
we're
using
tasting some of the gray label stuff too. I really liked the first strand, but like Seagrass is what I would drink normally.
Okay. You've used the states independently and Canada as one place. There are 2 or 3 distilleries in Canada probably that are sourcing or more. Are you buying for more than one?
Yeah. So there's multiple distilleries in Canada, but we buy barrels and sign NDA agreements.
With
So
multiple Canadian.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
with multiple Canadian distilleries. We also buy from brokers sometimes, so it's different. We can't really disclose like where we're getting it, but feel free to guess. Like everyone, that's why sometimes we
Peter's
can't
trying to sleuth
disclose
it out.
mash bills or anything either.
Okay, thank you.
This is really salty.
But
Salty.
yeah, it's like
Salty.
salty,
Salty,
floral,
really
bright.
salty. Salty and floral.
That ABV on this is also.
It's 120.
60.1.
It's really different.
Is this salty coming from some of the
First fill spirits.
barrels?
$85.99.
Really?
Someone is asking if the salty quality is coming from the barrels or where that's coming from.
So I think rye specifically, to me, generally, especially Canadian rye, there's like a tartness to it and there's like an acidity to rye that I don't get from bourbon that it like is texturally different. So maybe from that, but I also think rum agricole is just a saltier, more funkier style of rum. And then the maybe Madeira casks have like high, I mean, any grape that you're using in Madeira, you're like, you're essentially ruining it, but you're taking these really high acid grapes. And that's why Madeira is still like always fresh. Even if you taste Madeira, it's not fresh because it's cooked and ruined, but it's still, you can have Madeira from like 1880 something and it will still taste palatable because of the high acidity. So I just feel like Seagrass to me has this like salty perception, but it's got really nice acidity to it. And I think it's from a varying reasons. Like there could be the casks, could be just rye itself too. But I think it's definitely like the rum probably.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But it's salty and floral. It's great. And honestly, I like Seagrass if you're mixing it in like rum cocktails too. Like in addition to whiskey cocktails, like we as a sales team, we like Seagrass daiquiris, which are just 2 ounces of like normally rum, but we use Seagrass and like 0.75 Demerara and 1 ounce of lime juice, just shaken up, and it's fantastic. Simple, shaken, fresh cocktail. Also a rye tie with Seagrass, like if you like Mai Tais with rye, it's also cask strength rye too, so it's a definitely stiff cocktail.
Right time.
So like bourbon, the Seagrass has a vertical series. So there will be a gray label Seagrass and a gold label Seagrass that gets released every year. Seagrass kind of took off last year because at the beginning of the year, Fred Minnick came out with his top 100 whiskeys of the year and he blind tasted them all, and Seagrass got #2. So we sold out almost in all of our distributors across the country of Seagrass for a while. And like especially with these whiskeys, they have to sit in the finishing cask. We can't rush the process there. So they're out of stock. We need to wait till they're blended. So that happened last year. So we were like, all right, well, let's make a gray label and then let's make a gold label because we have older Canadian whiskeys. With Seagrass, we have the gray label Seagrass is going to be the next one we're going to taste, but it is 16-year Canadian rye. So all of it is Canadian. None of it is American. We take a portion and we put it into the same finishing cask. So rum, agricole, apricot brandy, and Madeira. So it's a blend of different 16-year-old Canadian rye barrels. The #3, it's the gray label Seagrass.
Barrel gray label Seagrass.
Yes.
Annual Seagrass releases.
So yeah, same, but it's going to be like the 16. Right now, the first 2 releases are 16-year Canadian rye with the Seagrass finishes. So this one is 133.34 proof. So probably the hottest that you have. I definitely recommend this one. Taste it without water. And then if you want to add a few drops of water or like a capful of water in it, it will help temper down the proof. This one always for me tastes, especially just being all Canadian rye. Like I didn't realize the difference between American and Canadian rye until I tasted like a pure Canadian rye barrel, but they're like earthier and dustier and like funkier too. So I feel like with the gray label Seagrass, you're really not getting that apricot like you get up front with the regular Seagrass. You're getting that at the finish, and it doesn't happen for like at least like a minute into it. It really is that like funky earthiness like up front. And it's for 133 proof though, I feel like anything that we do at high proof, but they're always palatable at the proof point.
So the gray label Seagrass has apricot as well.
Yeah, gray label Seagrass is the same finishes. So apricot brandy, Malmsey Madeira, and rum agricole or Martinique rum, but it's all 16-year-old Canadian rye.
I see what you mean about the funky.
Yeah, if you smell it on the nose, it's like, smells earthy and musty, like a grandma's attic or something like that, like wet wood.
She's really great description.
You raised a question when this is 100% Canadian, which means it'll be 100% rye grain. American ryes do not have to be entirely rye. Do you know what percentage of other grains are in those ones that go into the regular seagrass?
I don't know what percentage of the grains that go into the regular seagrass, but I know that traditionally Indiana rye is going to be that 95-5 mash bill of
Mhm.
95% rye, 5% malted barley. And Kentucky and Tennessee ryes are barely over like 51% rye. So I really don't know the mash bill on that. There's someone that we should hire to do the math though, because we need an additional person. We blend so many different barrels together that it's almost impossible to figure out the exact mash bill of the blends.
I guess I wasn't asking you for an exact number, but saying in terms of the difference in terms of the, grandma's attic for the straight rye versus the, somebody cleaned it a bit with the American.
Yeah. And I also think that 16-year, I mean, Canadian rye too, and Canadian spirits, they don't have to be done in like new charred barrel. So I just feel like it's 16 years old. It's old. It's funky.
Thank you.
Correct, because it doesn't say anything about apricot, Cabernet, Tennessee whiskey.
Oh, that was for the Great Label Dovetail. They put the wrong description on that one.
Gotcha, okay,
Yeah.
that's why I was asking.
So
about
on the placemats, it's the wrong description. For the Gray Label Seagrass, it is the description for Gray Label Dovetail, which we are not tasting. So the Gray Label Seagrass is done in the same finishing barrels as the regular Seagrass, but 16-year Canadian rye. Thank you for catching that. I missed that. So I looked these over and was
I
like, good
just
to
looking
go.
because I didn't, at first I didn't get the apricot on it. Now I am a little bit for this.
You don't get the apricot until like way late.
Yeah,
It like comes
And the
in.
other one just kind of smacked you in the face with it.
Yep. The apricot's late to the party on this guy.
Didn't taste an apricot.
But honestly, like just coming back to this after I smelled it initially and tasted it initially I put my nose in it and I was like, ooh, this is funky, like wet wood. And now I'm like, oh, after I tasted it, it smells like more fruit forward.
Still very dusty though. Amy, is that all of Vantage back there? Oh, these are-
People are ordering online, so. But then I texted the distributor, I'm working here. I texted the distributor and it is available, so you can still buy it and then we will be able to.
Yeah,
get those.
they have some now. We're good.
This is
I'm
a lot of
stocked.
work back here.
Yeah, you have to moderate the chat too.
I know, I feel like I'm in a call center. Yeah, customer service. The questions are crazy.
Does anybody, I would love to hear your perspective on like regular seagrass versus gray label. Who likes the regular seagrass better than the gray label seagrass? Who likes gray label better than regular? Cool.
Regular seagrass.
Regular is just more unique for me. The other one tastes like stuff I've had before. It's good, but like it tastes like Canadian whiskey to me, like which is fine. But like I think the regular is more unique.
I like the regular one because it's like more fruit forward and like easy drinking. It's juicy, yeah. But I do
This-
like the gray label seagrass a lot. I think it's super complex. It has it's probably the longest finish of any of the things that we've ever put into bottle. Like
It-
the fact that it's like, I'm still tasting it right now and I tasted it like a while ago and I'm still getting that apricot on the palate. Like so.
It has a long finish. I do agree. And if I like the finish, it would be great. I don't. I find it very woody. I don't find it very complex at all, to be honest with you. I find it really just a lot of wood and not much more. I don't get any of the apricot that you're talking
gray
about
label?
on this one. I love the regular seagrass. I thought that was a unique and delicious whiskey. But this, I mean, yeah, and it's not that hot. I mean, it's just so much wood to it. I don't really get any of the I mean, I get some diesel early on that reminds me of the rum, but that's more of a Jamaican rum as opposed to a rum agricole, which I would expect it to be a little different kind of funk. I mean, it's good, but I would, Seagrass has much more, has many more possibilities for me. I don't see myself ever reaching for this one. Oh yeah, I want that wood. I can see myself reaching for the regular seagrass because it's got a niche that's different than anything else I've tasted.
Yeah, I personally agree with you as well. I don't really like anything that sits in the wood barrels, like whiskey, for longer than 12 years. I just feel like you get too much wood on the palate with that too. So I agree with you there. It's definitely got that woody kind of palate. My palate is more attuned to the regular seagrass. It's fruitier and juicier, and you reach for it multiple times. You can have like multiple drams of regular seagrass, I think.
This is 66.67%.
If you have multiple drams of gray label seagrass, you're going to be like under the
You
table. For sure. 2 of them is enough.
I do get the apricot way late, like late to the party, but I think with the apricot being more to the forefront in the regular seagrass, that it does have more complexity for some reason than the gray label, like John was saying. So I prefer the regular one as well.
You get fruit, all the different fruits in the regular seagrass.
Cool. Yeah, the regular seagrass was a home run, I think, for us. It's my favorite thing to sell from our brand for sure. Cool.
It covers the basis
The last
of being.
So the last dram that we're going to be tasting tonight, we're actually discontinuing. So I thought it would be fun to feature it here for you guys. There's still some on shelves in stores, but we're not blending it again. So this is the last blend of Barrell American Vatted malts, which was a passion project that we did. We did 2 different blends of it, but the first one was a blend of 1.5 to like, I would say like maybe 8-year-old barrels of American single malt whiskey. And this is 3.5 to 10-year-old American single malt whiskeys. So everything's from the US, and some of these we can like name the distilleries that we source from, but they're all single malt American whiskeys that are going into this blend. So you'll have things from Texas, New York. Yes.
What's the New York McCarthy's?
I'm not entirely, no, I don't think so. It's not McCarthy's. I want to say maybe New York Distilling.
Mackenzie is
Not New York Distilling. Maybe Kings County. Kings County. Yeah. Mackenzie, though, from the Finger Lakes, great stuff. Great stuff. I mean, they're close to this region. But I wanted to end with this though, because it is very funky. Like it is. I don't know about what you guys, but like I made a lot of banana bread during COVID with my sister. And I get a lot of banana bread with this one. And especially like with dark chocolate, like cooking chocolate, but it's like very much grain forward and like peaty and smoky in a way.
I like,
Yeah. I really like it. I'm really sad that we're not doing this again, but yeah.
You go, oh, I like this. And it's the whiskey.
Quite proud of myself for getting the banana before she even said that. I was like typing away.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's dirty.
That could be the name.
What's the proof on this guy? This one's 118.22. Yeah, New York, Texas, Indiana, New Mexico, Washington, Arizona.
I mean, I feel like you could really mess that up, all of those.
I
think it's still
I like to know.
rounded.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It's dry.
But the nose is so fun. I feel like the nose is the most aromatic one that we've like had.
Yep.
But honestly, this was definitely a small project that we did, and it's just, I don't know, like we're not a distiller of American single malts, and American single malt as a category isn't like that big yet. So blending it, it's like we have small boutique stores that love it, and like the whole sales team really likes it just as a concept. but it doesn't really translate out. But it's not that it's, yeah, it's not bourbon.
So they could
It's not
keep
bourbon.
making it, you're just choosing not.
We
to.
don't have it, we like don't want to invest in the barrels, probably. I don't know, actually. I don't know the reason why we're not doing that. We're doing too many other things to be able to do everything again. So we had to cut somewhere. And I think that was one.
Lindsay, why do these distilleries want to sell you guys their?
I have no idea.
Can you
I have
repeat
no
the
idea.
question?
The question was, why do these distilleries want to sell us their juice? So
I don't understand that.
I think like my understanding of this industry too is that it's not just distilleries selling juice. I think distilleries will sell barrel, like people like us, we can go in and buy a barrel of like freshly distilled juice and liquid and keep it at a distillery for X amount of time, up to 8 years. You pay a certain amount of money and that's your barrel.
But if
And then
I'm
you can
producing
sell
my
it.
own stuff, why do I want to give you?
Because if you look at a place like Bardstown,
Yeah.
they make 95% of what they make is for everyone else, and then whatever they make for themselves.
I know they do that in the wine
Yeah,
business, right?
but that's
Someone
Yeah.
who's
also
wine
paying for bills for all those other
Great
places.
grower.
A negociant.
Producing wine,
Yeah.
they're selling the grape. The same idea with this?
I think it's a lot more nuanced than that. And I think that in the wine industry, it's more nuanced than just negociants as well. I mean, you have these large champagne houses that are blenders, essentially like whiskey blenders, but then you have grower champagnes. But I think that with the whiskey industry, it's not just distilleries selling their barrels. I think it's people buying the barrel. Like there's a whole brokerage level. There's like people that buy barrels and like keep them and invest in them. And you're buying these sets of barrels from brokers. And it's like, who's going to offer you the most money for things, right? Or they're just they're like bottling stuff and they're like, all right, we're going to use X amount of this distillate for our blend, for our whiskey. And then they have extra.
So I'm a distiller. I'm gonna, produce. I was always under the impression I'm producing as much as I can, but it sounds like maybe there's some intention to sell some off, and then maybe I'm charging you 5X or something.
It's a way
Yeah.
to get quick cash.
Yeah.
It doesn't go out to your sales team, you know, bottle.
Yeah, and I can't speak to that because I don't know.
So it's a
Yeah.
It's a little side.
Yeah, they're doing
But
it.
like, but that's what a lot of them are doing, because then they get moved and they also have them sign an NDA, so you don't even know if it's.
Well, that's what's
There
going
now.
on. Yeah, you can't say.
Yeah,
that.
so-
Yeah, I didn't realize Bardstown was doing it to that extent.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
I think it was only 5% of what they produce is for themselves.
And they also distill other things. They don't just distill whiskey. They'll do tequila.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they do like other contract distillation there. It's a beautiful facility though, Bardstown.
I love
I think
It was
that's
incredible.
Bardstown does tequila?
sometimes it doesn't fit into the blend, or, there's just kind of oddball, they'll have 10 casks here and they'll sell it off to, 30 casks, they'll sell it off to brokers, and then it gets out into the
That's an
world.
adjacent
Wait.
business. I didn't-
Just the fact that she knows.
I had no idea that it existed. I had no idea that brokers were a level. I also had no idea that we as people can go buy barrels and keep them there, and then we can sell them to either brokers or blenders, or we can bottle it ourselves and sell it. Like I did not know that was a possibility.
Did you say that Bardstown
You just
makes
visit it, you
tequila?
visit it, you taste a little bit, you're like, I'll keep it in. Yeah, yep.
Lindsay.
That's what I think it's like. And I can't speak to what the distiller's intentions are behind the things. But I also think that the reason
Interesting.
I like Barrell too is I came from the wine industry where I really was concerned about where the grapes were grown, who was doing anything, what they were doing in the facility. And now I'm like, I don't know any of those answers. Like, I don't know where the grapes were where the grains were coming from. Like, I don't think people that in our facility even know where the grains are coming from at this point. It's a totally different model, but there is still beauty in this too. And it was great for me because I needed my perspective to change, because I was being a little pretentious with like the wine stuff. I was like, oh, it's not biodynamic. Like, oh, like that's terrible then. I'm not drinking that. And now I'm just like, oh, well, you're taking unloved barrels, right? You're saying, why are they going to get rid of these things? And you're taking these barrels that are now ours. And we're like, okay, maybe you're a little bit weird and maybe you're a little bit too oaky, but we're going to use a part of you, like a bucket of you, and we're going to mix you with these other things. And we're going to make something that's delicious, that consistently gets higher awards. And like, I mean, you guys tasted the stuff.
coming in 10 years ago. That's the apex of when kind of flavor profiles in these whiskeys started to get popular. Before that, it was single batch, small batch. It
Yeah.
was still your own specialized stuff, and you did something different. So, did that? It seemed like it's worked out from day one for you guys. Was in the beginning, was it just popular right away, or did people say, "Oh, this is blended stuff"? I don't know. What
I
it's about.
still get that a little bit, but I get it way less than I did even 2 years ago. I'm sure when Joe was selling that out of his car, like the batch one, and he was driving around with it, trying to get people on board, that people were like, "Oh, this is blended." No, I have stores that are like, "Oh, we don't buy any blended whiskey." But I think blending over the last, like even like you said, 10 years, like has changed dramatically. There's so many people that are blending. I mean, everyone can buy MGP stuff and they're blending it now. And like, we were the ones that kind of started it first.
Yeah.
And we did it first and we got the awards first. And then people were like, okay, now we can enter the space. Now it's safe to enter the space because we kind of created a model that has been replicated. So, but I mean, we were inspired. No ideas are new anymore. Like we were inspired by what they did in Scotland, but I think for American whiskey, we kind of changed it from being like blending to mask flaws into blending to make something better than it was. Because I think blending for a long time, I mean, when I learned about spirits, I mean, blending was like blending out flaws, finishing out flaws, like that's what you did. You just covered stuff up. And I think what we do is completely different than that. We're not blending to cover up flaws. We're like getting actually good distillate. We're blending for flavor profile. We're blending to create different flavors. We're blending for different palates too. Like I have people that are like, oh, I hate Armida, but I love Seagrass. And they're like, I love Armida, but I hate Dovetail. Like there's something for everyone. And even our batches too. Yeah, hate's a strong word. I love all of them, to be honest. But there's like something for everyone. Everything's blended differently. I mean, I've been at the company from batch 25 to now batch 34, and I have like certain favorite batches. Like loved batch 29. It had a little weeded with bourbon in it. It came out right before the summertime. It was like fresh and floral. There's certain people in the company that love batch 28 because it was 10 and 11-year-old wood forward barrels. So there's like fun stuff about Barrell that is not just the same brand. Like I'm not working for like, I don't want to hate on, I'm not talking about other whiskey companies, but Tito's, for instance, if I sold Tito's, I'd be like, would you like to taste the 375 or the 750? Like, what do you want to taste today? Like, at least I get to go in the stores and I'm like, would you like to taste? Like, I have to, yeah. And they're great. They're a great company. They like donate a lot to charity. They got the dog thing going on. Like Tito's is a case study though, on how they took away, because I used to bartend and people used to call for Grey Goose and Belvedere, and now everyone's calling for Tito's. So they did something right. But I don't want to carry a bag of Tito's around to have people taste it. This is what I like to do. There's I mean, you've tasted 7 different whiskeys today and none of them are the same, right? I know. I don't want to have a wheelie bag and then another bag with me and like have like 12 different bottles around in
Is there
boxes.
anything that you're producing now that's weeded?
Right now, no, but the last weeded bourbon batch that we did was batch 31 was weeded.
Nothing that's currently out is weeded.
No, but you'll probably find batch 31 on the shelf somewhere.
Sitting out there.
Yeah, I would say like, okay, so the weeded bourbons,
31 hole?
No. We don't have the regular bourbon. Yeah.
yeah. So the bourbon batches that are weeded are going to be 25, 27, 29, 30, and 31. Those all had wheat in them.
Is it noted on the bottle or just the website?
It's noted on the website.
Oh, we had a weeded bourbon.
I like weeded too. 25 was my favorite until 29 came out. You could find 29. 30 also was interesting because it's usually Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee bourbon that we're blending, but 30 had weeded Wyoming bourbon in it and weeded Kentucky bourbon in it. And
I love Wyoming weeded. That brand, they put out some.
yeah,
Have you tried their stuff?
yeah, it's great. But that one was a lot of people's favorites too. I liked that one as well, but it was a little bit richer in style than 29, and I liked the like fresh brightness of 29. Batch 33 is fantastic. It's like a high rye and high corn blend, but it's like, if you like old fashions, like that is the one to put in an old fashioned because it's got like orange oil like notes to it. 34 that's coming out is also fantastic. It's got like an oolong tea. It's got like this like tea note that's in it that I really like too. And like a praline, like it's a little nuttier because it's got little older barrels.
Might save time by saying the ones you don't like.
I mean, like someone online said, I don't like the older stuff. Like I don't like things that are anywhere like the 15-year from last year, the gray label, not my style. I don't like old bourbon because I think when you put it for so long in that new charred American oak barrel, it just like becomes like chewing on wood. Oh no, that's 24-year-old Canadian whiskey. Canadian whiskey is interesting because you don't have to put it in new charred oak.
We didn't taste the 15-year today.
Yeah.
We tasted a different gray label.
The new
bourbon.
the new gray label bourbon is 15-year.
Well, no, I mean the mystery.
The mystery
It's
was
24
24-year-old Canadian.
Not necessarily a new chart of barrel. So they do this trial.
Yeah. So it's just like those, I had the opportunity and the privilege to taste Pappy 23 at a bar one time when I was like, just like a tiny bit of it. And I was like, oh, let me see what the hype is all about and why people will search for this and spend thousands upon thousands of dollars for a bottle. And it was wildly underwhelming. And it's like, but it's also good whiskey, but it is wildly underwhelming for just, and also like we went to Willet as a sales team and we have blind tasted and like the production team too. So I was at the table with the girl that ran social media at the time, the accounting manager, Trip Stimson, the master blender, and me. And we're there. We have 4 different whiskeys and we're all blind tasting them and they're all single barrel bourbons from Willet. It was a 6-year, an 8-year, a 13-year, and like a 23-year. And the whole table's favorite was hands down the 8-year. It was not the 13-year, the 23-year, the oldest one was like, it just tasted like boiled sticks. And Joe has said this before, like that's why we're never going to bottle. We have people asking all the time, do you have single barrels of 14-year-old again? Do you have 14-year-old single barrels? We don't want to bottle single barrels of older whiskey because we want to use like spoonfuls of that in blends or bucketfuls of that in blends because those things add something to a blend, but on their own, they're kind of like not in balance anymore. And I'd rather drink old Armagnac, old Madeira than I would rather drink old whiskey or even old Scotch. I feel like old Scotch is a little bit different too. And old Canadian stuff too. It's like neutral barrel, like you said, but they don't really have any.
Too. I mean, the price for that 24-year-old Canadian.
Yeah.
Do you put the batch number on the bottles or how would somebody know by the dates?
She's
What was the
asking
question?
if you put the batch numbers on the bottles, which you
Okay.
do on everything, right?
Question was, do we put the batch numbers on the bottles? So our barrel bourbon, this one is batch, referred to as batch, and the batch numbers are on the bottles. So this one's batch 30, for instance, on this. We're out at 34 right now. But with Armida, Dovetail, Seagrass, and Vantage,
Can you show that with the camera?
Because they're not blended for different flavor profiles. We're calling them like essentially releases because they're blended for consistency. So if you look in the corner of the label of Dovetail or Seagrass, you'll see a little tiny number there, but the proofs will vary because everything is bottled at cash strength. We're not diluting down to proof. So each proof is going to be different.
Thanks, Luke.
Does that make sense?
Thanks, Lou. Yeah, I was just wondering how you deciphered them all. Thank you.
Perfect. That was a good question.
Going back to the Canadian, the first one, I like it more than I liked it initially. It's opened up a little bit. I'm getting a little bit of mocha.
Yeah, it's
and
definitely got
even a
milk.
little carrot. Yeah, it's the austerity is not there like it is in some of the other older batches.
Mm-hmm. I think the 24-year-old whiskey drinks nicer and fresher than the 16-year-old rye.
Agreed.
Like the Seagrass. Like this is, I think this is one of the best things we put into bottle like ever, the gray label whiskey. I think like the Armagnac and the Oloroso finish too. Sometimes with bourbon, I get like this like bittersweet chocolate, but this is a milk chocolate. This is definitely like a sweeter style chocolate.
I consider it more of a mocha.
Yeah.
You know, a little bit of coffee in there as well.
Chocolate milk.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. It's not overly sweet as like a pure milk chocolate, but like that milk chocolate of like, a chocolate milk or a mocha is that's a good description.
Awesome.
I'm gonna re-go to the gray label bourbon just to see if that's changed.
I did too. It's still a hard comparison to the Barrel Vantage bourbon, I think. That's probably my favorite.
I don't know. I'm gonna have to go make banana bread.
I don't like the gray label bourbon. Sorry, just don't like it. It's again, I don't find it to be complex. I find it to be woody and very one-dimensional.
Saves you money then.
The gray
I
label
know,
bourbon,
I
I
mean,
feel
it's
like
shocking
they're
to me.
always going to be woody, and they're older bourbons too. So that's like what I was saying about like the older stuff too.
Yeah, no,
But
I
this one is
understand.
a little bit more oxidative than the previous years, I think.
I mean, all I really taste is wood. It's just
John, which one is that?
the bourbon, the gray label. I mean, and I
Gray
did
label.
for the also with the seagrass. It's, I mean, yes, it's the age, and of course, a lot of the age is because of its rarity too. It's stuck around for a little bit. And I agree with you in your assessment of Pappy 23 versus say the 12-year. The 12-year is much better, much more delicious bourbon for drinking. Pappy 23 is probably better as an investment.
Yeah, pays for people's college education sometimes. I've had people say that they sold their whiskey collection for like $22,000 because they like went hunting for a bunch of Blantons and Pappies over the course of a few years. I'm like, wow, good for you. But that's why the prices go up. So bad for us.
Unfortunately, that's one semester now.
I know. That's like that's room
And that's at a
board.
cheaper school.
Ouch,
I was
Peter,
gonna say
stop
that's-
it. Stop talking about it.
All right, well, I think we should thank Lindsay for coming tonight and
What happened?
Into the sound.
if you have any other questions, both her and I will be hanging around. I brought all the bottles, almost all the bottles that we had in the shop here tonight. So if you wanted something, you can purchase it. There was one online order, so there's one Vantage left, but a lot of these outside of the Canadian and
like
maybe
this
a couple
one.
of the
I
gray
love the
labels
salty
you can
one.
order in.
Oh, good, Sophie.
It was so different.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you guys. Thanks for the
Thank you.
questions.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Barrels is